My name's Lucas, and last week I got a $250 Venmo request from someone named Karen with AK-77 for a lake pass I never signed up for, on my own property. That's right. I own the land, the lake, the fence, even the tree she stapled her handmade, public access flyer to. And as if that wasn't enough to make my eye twitch, she threw in a note saying, "Welcome to the community. We do things a little differently here." Turns out, differently means trespassing, fraud, and selling access to my ranch lake like it was a public swimming hole. By the time I confronted her, she was charging people by the month, printing lake rules with her name on them, and had half the town thinking she owned the water. What she didn't know was that the road she drives every day, the one she uses to go home, wasn't even legally hers. And it was about to be mine. When I first returned to my grandfather's ranch after nearly 5 years away, I was expecting peace, quiet, and maybe the sweet echo of frogs along the lake. Instead, I was greeted by the revving of a pickup engine, the hollow thump of someone dragging a cooler, and the sound of splashy laughter, dozens of voices I didn't recognize. It wasn't family. It wasn't friends. These were strangers. With beach chairs. On my property. I walked toward the lake in disbelief. 4 SUVs were parked along the dirt path leading to the dock. A pop-up canopy had been pitched right next to the oak tree my grandfather used to nap under. And then I saw it clear as day, duct-taped to the tree, a laminated sign that read Public Lake Access, HOA verified. My blood pressure rose like a geyser. I called out, "Excuse me. Who told you this was public?" A man with a fishing hat glanced up like I was the one interrupting. "Karen said we could. We paid for passes. Real nice lady. Runs the HOA." My jaw dropped. Passes? What passes? I wasn't even part of the HOA. This was private land, and it had been in my family since the 1950s. I marched back toward my truck, fists clenched, mind racing. Who the hell was Karen, and how long had this been going on? I followed the trail of folding chairs and damp footprints straight into the adjoining subdivision, technically built on what used to be the far east end of my grandfather's property. That's when I saw it, a perfectly groomed cul-de-sac with pastel houses and manicured hedges, all wrapped in a smug little white fence. I pulled into the community office parking lot, stomped inside, and demanded to speak with Karen. The receptionist gave me that overly sweet, tight-lipped smile that said, "Oh boy, another one," and buzzed someone in the back. A few moments later, a woman strutted out, bleach-blonde bob, gold-rimmed sunglasses, Lululemon leggings, and a Bluetooth headset. "Hi there," she chirped. "You must be new. I'm Karen, president of the HOA." I didn't shake her hand. I didn't smile. I held up a picture on my phone, the one I had just taken of the lake sign. "That's my land, my lake, my tree. And this? This is not a public lake." Her smile didn't even flicker. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, chuckling as if I had just told a silly joke, "you're mistaken. That area's been used by the community for years. It's kind of a tradition. Besides, your side isn't fenced, so technically it's open access." My mouth hung open. "Open access? You stapled a sign to my tree and charged people money to use my lake." She shrugged like I just asked why she put marshmallows in her salad. "Look, everyone's happy. The community gets some outdoor fun, and the donations go toward keeping things clean. You should be thanking me." I left before I said something I'd regret. I drove straight to the county assessor's office and pulled the property map. Just as I suspected, the lake and the surrounding shoreline were clearly marked under my name. No easements, no community shares, no traditions in the legal record. That night, I sent Karen an official cease and desist letter. I printed copies, mailed one, emailed another. I even dropped one off with her receptionist the next morning. But Karen wasn't done. A few days later, I returned to the ranch to find someone had cut the lock on the main gate and replaced it with one of their own. Another new sign had appeared, this one larger, with HOA branding and a QR code for lake memberships. I scanned it. It led to a Google form labeled Karen's Summer Splash Club. I nearly blacked out. The form had pricing tiers, monthly memberships, add-ons for paddleboard access. It even listed hours of operation and quiet swim zones. I tore the sign down and drove to the local sheriff's office. The deputy, while sympathetic, said unless I had a direct video of Karen herself tampering with the gate or collecting cash, they couldn't do much. Civil dispute. Property matter. Take it up in court. So I did the next best thing. I installed a wildlife camera pointed directly at the gate. I set up a hidden GoPro inside the mailbox. And I hired a private security company to patrol the property every 3 nights. Within a week, I had footage of Karen unlocking the gate with a key, giving a family a tour of the dock, and waving them down toward the lake. In one video, she even tells a group, "No alcohol past the rocks." HOA policy. I nearly threw my laptop across the room. The following weekend, I attended the HOA's community meeting, even though I technically wasn't a member. I asked to speak and walked up to the podium. Karen was sitting front and center, arms crossed, smug as ever. I didn't speak at first. I just played a clip on the big screen. Karen waving, clipboard in hand saying, "Enjoy your time at the HOA lake." The room fell dead silent. Then murmurs. Then gasp. One old man shouted, "You said it was donated land." Karen stammered. This is being taken out of context." I looked her square in the eye and said, "Let me be perfectly clear. This lake is private. It's been in my family for generations. Every person you charged for access was defrauded. And the next person caught crossing that gate without my permission is getting sued. No more warnings." Karen's face lost color, but she still tried to weasel her way out, blaming clerical confusion, and accusing me of disrupting the community. She even claimed my family abandoned the lake, which nearly made me laugh out loud. I showed the county deeds on screen, pointed out the GPS coordinates, and displayed the security cam footage on loop. People started booing her. 2 board members walked out. Karen looked like a chicken trying to explain fire to a crowd of angry farmers. I left that meeting with half the HOA on my side and the other half confused, but no longer loyal to Karen. I thought the drama might be done. I thought she'd pack up her signs and disappear. But then, 2 days later, something even crazier happened. I got a text from my buddy Dave in County Record. It was a screenshot of a listing on the upcoming property auction. A 30-foot wide sliver of gravel road, the very one Karen uses every single day to get from her gated cul-de-sac to the main highway. A forgotten parcel, unclaimed due to a mapping error. Dave wrote one line under the image, "Yours for $2,100 if you move fast." And in that moment I realized something beautiful. Karen may have tried to sell my lake access, but I was about to own the road she needed to get home. By the next morning, I was parked at the county clerk's office before the doors even opened. I had the parcel number memorized, a cashier's check in hand, and a cup of gas station coffee that tasted like melted tar but kept my pulse steady. The land in question wasn't even visible on most maps. It was a narrow gravel cut-through between my property line and the back gate of the HOA subdivision. For decades, people must have assumed it was public or community-owned. It wasn't. It had slipped through paperwork cracks when the original ranch was subdivided, and it had never been officially claimed. No taxes had been paid on it in years. Karen's Golden Gate sat right on top of it. Her only exit from the neighborhood depended on that forgotten strip of land. And now, with one notarized signature and a stamp from a half-asleep clerk, it belonged to me. I didn't tell a soul. I drove straight back to the ranch and spent the entire afternoon walking that gravel path, taking measurements, running a line of flags along the edges, and imagining the look on Karen's face when she realized what had just happened. The road wasn't just her route to the highway. It was her grocery run, her school pickup lane, her yoga commute, her wine night delivery zone. Without it, she'd be stuck with a muddy back trail that flooded half the year and curved around a drainage ditch no fire truck would dare cross. She was boxed in, and she didn't even know it yet. I started small. First, I replaced the rickety old post at the entrance with a heavy-duty steel pole and mounted a bright yellow private property sign to it. I added a new no trespassing placard for good measure. Then I contacted a fencing company and ordered a custom gate, black iron, keypad lock with solar-powered camera mount included. It wasn't just about blocking access. It was about making a statement. This was no longer a shared shortcut. This was mine. While waiting for the gate installation, I decided to do a little fieldwork. I made a burner email and used it to fill out Karen's Lake Pass form, Karen's Summer Splash Club. I got a reply within 3 hours. A PDF of her terms and conditions, complete with fake HOA headers, a PayPal link, and even a QR code to a so-called member portal. I forwarded it to my lawyer and smiled. The more she kept this scam going, the worse it would be for her. He called me back later that day, chuckling. She's either incredibly stupid or incredibly bold. Either way, we'll eat her alive in court. Still, I wanted more than a lawsuit. I wanted a story people would laugh at for years. So I did something a little devious. I visited the HOA Facebook page, using a fake account, and started asking around. Hey, does anyone know if Karen's Lake Pass includes parking? I don't want to get towed. The comments exploded. Some folks admitted they had been parking on my land for 2 summers now. Others said they paid $50 extra for early bird dock access. A few were mad the lake was closed lately due to new neighbor drama. That part stung a little, but it confirmed what I needed to know. Karen's scam was wide, messy, and well documented by her own customers. Just as I was getting ready to deliver my next punch, something unexpected happened. A pair of inspectors showed up at my ranch unannounced. One was from the county zoning board, and the other wore a city code enforcement badge. They said they'd received multiple complaints that I was operating an unlicensed business, specifically a recreational facility, without permit. I laughed. Then I didn't. Because they were serious. They asked to see licenses, insurance, and safety procedures for managing a public lake attraction. When I told them this was private land and I hadn't opened it to the public, they raised their eyebrows. Then why were people being charged for access? My fists clenched. Karen had filed the complaint. She was trying to flip the script. I took them on a full walkthrough, showed them my deed, pointed to the no trespassing signs, the security footage, and even let them scan the barcodes on the old laminated signs left behind by Karen's club members. After an hour of back and forth, they apologized and agreed there was no case, but they warned me to keep better control of my land. I assured them I was about to lock it down tighter than Fort Knox. That same evening, the gate arrived. Watching the fencing crew drill it into place was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. It had 2 swinging panels, thick steel bars, and a keypad entry with remote override from my phone. I added a motion sensor camera that streamed directly to my laptop. I also placed a new mailbox with a little plaque that read, "Private easement, owner operated." I knew Karen would see it the minute she turned the corner. And sure enough, 2 days later, she did. I was sipping coffee on my porch when the motion alert buzzed on my phone. I clicked the feed and saw her white Mercedes SUV roll up, slow down, and stop. She got out, phone in hand, walked up to the keypad, and began pressing buttons like a toddler at an arcade. Nothing happened. She looked up at the camera and waved like it was a friendly doorbell. Then she tried again. Still nothing. She put her hands on her hips, spun around, and looked completely bewildered. That was when I drove up behind her in my truck and rolled down the window. "Afternoon," I said with a nod. She turned, flustered. "What is this? Is this some kind of joke?" I shook my head. "No joke. This is private property. You're trespassing." She laughed the kind of laugh people do when they think you're bluffing. "I use this road every day. This is community access. You can't just lock it." I held up the deed packet and let her see the county seal. "Actually, I can. I bought it last week. You've been driving across it illegally. Her jaw dropped. This is outrageous. I'm calling the HOA. You're going to regret this. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, you are the HOA. Or at least, you were. Her face turned red. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the gate. This is going to get reversed. I know people. You'll be forced to remove it. I smiled. By all means. Try. But in the meantime, you'll need to find another way home. Or you can request an easement agreement, with a monthly toll, of course. I didn't wait for her answer. I put the truck in reverse, did a slow turn, and left her standing there, mouth hanging open, as the sun set behind her like the closing credits of a very expensive mistake. That night, I watched the footage again. She stood by the gate for 15 minutes, called someone, probably her husband or lawyer, and then stormed back into her car. I knew this wouldn't be the last I'd hear from her, but I also knew the next time she came at me, she'd be on very shaky ground. Literally. Because now, the very road under her tires was mine. And I wasn't in the mood to share. 2 days after Karen's tantrum at the gate, I came home to find a fresh insult parked right in front of my cattle fence, an unmarked white trailer with construction tape and a paper note taped to the side that read "Road Survey in Progress." At first, I thought it was some utility crew doing their routine nonsense, but then I spotted the telltale signs. There was no permit number, no county markings, and when I checked the license plate on the back, it was registered to a property management company that Karen just happened to run part-time. So now she was faking county operations. It was the pettiest chess move I'd seen in a long time, and she really thought it would rattle me. I calmly took a video, photographed everything, and forwarded it to the county clerk's office. Less than 3 hours later, I got confirmation. No surveys had been ordered, no easement disputes filed, and absolutely no authority had granted any access through my new property. I was advised to call the sheriff's department if the trailer wasn't moved by sundown. But I didn't need to, because by mid-afternoon, the trailer had mysteriously disappeared, poof, like a ghost that realized it got caught. I knew what was happening. Karen wasn't trying to win a legal battle. She was trying to wage psychological warfare. She was trying to annoy me into submission, bury me under little invasions until I either gave up or blew up. What she didn't understand was I wasn't the same man who had left this land years ago. I had been forged in startup wars, corporate negotiations, and high-pressure rooms where people bet millions on nothing but ideas. Karen was trying to rattle a man who had once negotiated a hostile takeover while watching his apartment flood from a broken pipe. Her fake signs, her HOA antics, her bootleg lake passes, they were laughably amateur compared to the battles I'd fought. But what made this personal was the disrespect. She had walked onto my land, stapled her name to my trees, and then had the audacity to act like I was the intruder. The next week, things escalated in a more destructive way. I arrived one morning to find deep tire ruts gouged into the dirt path beside the new gate. Someone had tried to go off-road around the gate. They had failed miserably, judging by the broken shrubbery, dented wire fencing, and a single discarded shoe lodged in the mud. There were also 2 crushed, "No trespassing" signs and what looked like a spilled protein shake. I reviewed the footage. It was Karen's nephew, one of her goons from the HOA who'd helped set up the fake lake events. He'd tried to drive around the gate in a lifted truck, misjudged the terrain, and gotten stuck long enough to leave his front plate behind. Thank you, universe. I filed a police report that afternoon and handed everything over. Karen must have heard about it, because that evening she showed up again, this time with a man in a suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Her lawyer, apparently. I met them at the gate, arms crossed. She started her speech with a fake smile, talking about community pathways and historic access rights, but I stopped her halfway through and asked if her lawyer would like to see the signed deed. He muttered something about amicable resolutions and temporary passage allowances. I cut him off. You're standing on land your client has used for unauthorized commercial gain. I have receipts, recordings, and a legal team that eats fake HOAs for breakfast. Your options are to walk away or we start discussing restitution. Loudly. In court. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her lawyer looked even more uncomfortable. They left without another word. I didn't even bother watching them go. I had bigger plans to focus on now. Because while they were busy trying to undermine me with phony trailers and vandalism, I had been quietly building something far more permanent. The local news had gotten wind of the HOA drama thanks to an anonymous tip. I wonder who might have sent that. They'd requested an interview, and I politely declined but offered to provide documents proving Karen's fraudulent activity. Within a few days, the headline appeared. HOA president accused of selling access to private lake, now trapped behind locked gate. The article included stills from the security footage, a quote from the county clerk confirming my legal ownership, and a hilarious excerpt from a neighbor who said, "I paid $50 for a paddleboard pass and only got a broken floaty." It was golden. The public opinion tide turned fast. People began questioning the HOA's other practices, and Karen's power started to crumble. But of course, she didn't take that lying down. No, she pulled out one last desperate move. She attempted to file an emergency injunction with the county court, arguing that the access road had been historically shared, and that I was now blocking an essential public right-of-way. It was a ridiculous claim, but it forced me into court. And honestly, I welcomed it. Because now it wouldn't just be a quiet feud. Now it would be on record. The courtroom was half full, mostly nosy neighbors, a few HOA board members, and even someone who used to fish at my lake and now carried a sign reading, "Free the Road." Karen arrived in full-on power mode, dressed like she was about to present a TED Talk on neighborhood supremacy. Her lawyer tried his best to sound confident, citing vague maps and exaggerated community use claims. Then it was my turn. I walked the judge through the timeline, presented aerial photos, property surveys, video footage of Karen charging for lake access, receipts of her fake passes, and statements from lake users confirming they thought it was a public facility because of Karen. The judge looked unimpressed with Karen's lawyer, but he looked downright annoyed with Karen herself. Especially when I presented a letter from the county surveyor verifying that the parcel was not a right-of-way, had no recorded easements, and was fully under my ownership. The final nail in the coffin was when I played the video of Karen yelling at a teenager for not following lake safety policy, while waving a fake clipboard like she was the manager of fun. The courtroom laughed. The judge did not. He ruled in my favor within minutes. The road was mine. The gate was legal. And Karen was advised to cease any further interference or risk civil penalties. She stormed out before the ruling was fully read, but the damage was done. She had lost. Not just the case, but her control, her grip on the neighborhood, and most of all, her illusion of being untouchable. I walked out of the courtroom to a round of awkward claps and a reporter trying to shove a mic in my face. I just smiled and said, "Some people sell lake passes. I buy roads." Then I got in my truck and drove back to the ranch, letting the gate swing open as my phone buzzed with texts from neighbors thanking me. Not just for the road, but for exposing the mess they'd been living under. As I stood at the lake that night, looking over the still water and the distant shimmer of house lights on the horizon, I realized something. This wasn't just about property. It wasn't even just about revenge. It was about setting a boundary where one had been violated. It was about telling someone like Karen that no matter how many fake forms, no matter how many laminated lies, she couldn't take what wasn't hers. And now, for the first time in weeks, the only footsteps on this land were mine. The morning after the court ruling, I thought I'd wake up to peace. For the first time in weeks, I slept like someone who didn't have to check his cameras every night. The road was mine, the gate was legal, and Karen had been publicly humiliated. But people like her don't go down quietly. They don't take loss as an ending. They treat it as a temporary pause between tantrums. So, when I heard the hollow thud of something hitting my fence around 6 in the morning, I knew in my bones it wasn't a deer or stray wind. I walked out in boots and a flannel, coffee in hand, and found a pile of freshly dumped garbage. Not just any garbage: shredded HOA newsletters, dozens of laminated signs, and a broken lawn chair that looked like it had been dragged through a wood chipper. And right on top, like a cherry on a trash sundae, was one of Karen's fake lake passes with the words "Hope you're happy" scribbled across it in permanent marker. I didn't bother cleaning it up right away. I took photos, filed another police report, and installed a second camera that would catch anything moving near the gate. Karen thought she was being clever, petty without being prosecutable, but what she didn't understand was how much goodwill she'd burned through with the community already. The neighbors who used to nod politely now gave her cold stares. Some even crossed the street when they saw her coming. And the board members who hadn't yet resigned were quietly trying to distance themselves, as the HOA newsletter now contained a legal disclaimer on every page, probably out of fear of being sued for association. Later that week, I found out Karen had hosted an emergency community roundtable in her backyard. The invite was digital and private, but one of her neighbors forwarded it to me. The subject line? Reclaiming our shared spaces. I couldn't help but laugh. Her version of shared spaces was stuff I don't own but still want to profit from. Apparently, the roundtable turned into a full-on rant session, where Karen claimed I was planning to charge every vehicle that passed my gate and implied that I'd be turning the lake into a private resort for rich outsiders. She called me a land hoarder and suggested the HOA hire a lawyer to file a community rights claim. Never mind that the court had already ruled in my favor. She didn't need truth. She just needed enough people to believe her long enough to stir chaos. But this time, the community didn't bite. A neighbor named Pete, who'd been quiet during all of this, finally spoke up. He stood during her backyard meeting and asked one simple question. "Karen, if it's all community land, why have you been charging people for it this whole time?" That ended the meeting on the spot. Several attendees walked out. The next morning, I woke up to a new message in my inbox. A short apology from Pete, followed by an attached list of everyone who had paid Karen for lake access over the past 2 years. It had names, emails, dates, even the amounts paid. Some people had forked over hundreds. A few even mentioned Karen had threatened to revoke their neighborhood privileges if they didn't renew. One person said they'd been told I was a corporate developer trying to steal the lake from local families. That one hit me square in the jaw. She hadn't just lied. She'd painted me as a villain to sell her scam. With the new list in hand, I decided it was time for something more permanent than court orders and news articles. It was time for exposure. Not petty revenge. Not a fight. A reveal. I worked with my lawyer and a local reporter who had been following the story since the gate incident. We didn't just want another article, we wanted a full segment. So I agreed to a filmed interview, walking through the lake, showing the old laminated signs, replaying the footage of Karen taking money and giving speeches about lake responsibility. We even included testimonials from neighbors who had been duped. One woman nearly cried as she talked about bringing her kids to the lake, thinking it was legally safe, only to find out later she'd been trespassing. When the news aired, it hit like a thunderclap. The headline was simple but brutal. HOA president sold fake lake passes on private property, now loses road access to her own home. The footage of Karen at the gate, pressing buttons and waving at the camera, played on loop. Within hours, the HOA's Facebook page exploded with comments. Some called for Karen's resignation. Others demanded refunds. A few posted screenshots of their payment history and threatened legal action. And buried among the chaos was one post that made everything worth it. A user uploaded a meme of Karen standing by the gate with the caption, "You shall not pass without a deed." The fallout didn't take long. Karen was called into an emergency board meeting and voted out as HOA president. Officially, it was a mutual agreement to transition leadership. But the truth was clear. She was done. Her authority had collapsed. Her image had crumbled. And the people who once whispered about community preservation were now talking about criminal charges. I didn't even need to push. She'd burned herself down, one laminated lie at a time. But even with her out, the mess she left behind still lingered. The HOA board, desperate to restore credibility, contacted me directly and offered to formally recognize the lake and the road as off-limits to any future community use. They wanted to avoid lawsuits and negative attention. I agreed on one condition. Karen would have to write a formal apology to every resident who had bought a pass and refund every payment made. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the principle. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, not just as an embarrassment, but as a responsibility she couldn't ignore. A week later, envelopes started appearing in mailboxes. Inside was a short, stiff note from Karen. To whom it may concern, I regret any confusion or miscommunication related to lake access. Refund enclosed. Some neighbors said the check amounts were wrong. Others said the apology felt like it had been typed through gritted teeth. But it didn't matter. The symbolic surrender had been made. The damage was done. Karen stopped appearing at community events, and when I passed her street during my morning runs, her curtains stayed closed. She'd become the ghost of her own kingdom. The final piece fell into place when the HOA held a neighborhood vote to restructure their authority. The board lost powers over land not owned by the HOA. They also passed a rule banning any individual from collecting money on behalf of the community without full transparency and prior approval. The best part? They invited me to serve as a consulting landowner, not because they wanted me to help run things, but because they didn't want to cross me ever again. I accepted, mostly for the humor of it. It was poetic. The same people who once trespassed on my lake now asked me to oversee their ethical boundaries. That night, I sat on the dock, lantern flickering beside me, beer in hand. The water was calm again. My property was secure. The road was quiet. And somewhere beyond those hills, Karen was sitting behind her gate, wondering how a little scam turned into a landslide. She had built her empire on a foundation of fraud, and all it took to collapse it was one forgotten stretch of gravel and a man who didn't back down. I didn't just win back my land. I reclaimed my peace, and with every ripple in the lake, I was reminded that boundaries, when respected, create more freedom, not less. A week after the neighborhood vote stripped Karen of her power, I received an invitation I never expected. It came from the newly restructured HOA board, the same group that had once ignored my complaints and sided with her phony authority. The email was polite, even formal, asking if I would attend a community appreciation cookout at the park near the subdivision entrance. They mentioned it was a gesture of goodwill, a way to show that things were different now, and they'd be honored if I made a short appearance. At first, I laughed out loud. The same people who had once trespassed on my land now wanted to pass me a plate of barbecue? But then I thought about it a little longer. Sometimes, the best way to win wasn't to gloat. It was to show up, stand tall, and let your presence remind people how the story had ended. So I went. Not for the burgers. Not for the speeches. But because I wanted to see what Karen would do when the entire neighborhood had to smile at the man who bought her only road home. I wore jeans, boots, and a plain shirt, no need for theatrics. When I arrived, people actually clapped. That was new. Several neighbors walked up to shake my hand. Some apologized. Others told me their side of the story, that they were misled, that they thought the lake access was legitimate, that Karen had a way of making everything sound official. A few even admitted they had suspected something was off, but didn't want to rock the boat. I told them I understood. But now the boat had sunk, and maybe it was better that way. Then I saw her. Karen stood near the drink table, arms folded, sunglasses on even though we were under a canopy. Her body language screamed discomfort. She didn't look at me directly, but I saw the moment she realized I was there. Her spine stiffened, her jaw clenched, and her fake smile melted into the kind of expression someone wears when they realize no one's listening anymore. It was the first time I had seen her look genuinely powerless. Not angry. Not defensive. Just out of place, like a retired dictator trying to enjoy the democracy they once tried to destroy. She didn't come over. Didn't speak. And that was fine with me. I stayed for an hour, made small talk, accepted a thank you plaque shaped like a tiny gate, an unintentionally hilarious gesture, and left before things got awkward. As I walked back to my truck, I caught one last glimpse of Karen staring down at her shoes while a kid tried to get her attention. She barely moved. The self-proclaimed queen of the community had become a bystander in her own backyard. A few days later, I decided it was time to close the chapter in my own way. I wanted something quiet but lasting, a kind of final punctuation mark on everything that had happened. So I commissioned a small brick structure right at the edge of the road Karen once ruled. Nothing big. Just a decorative outhouse, professionally built, complete with a wooden plaque above the door that read Karen's office. It wasn't vindictive. It was art. Satire. A reminder to anyone who passed that even the loudest voices can crumble when they're built on lies. Within a week, people started leaving little items at the base. A pink flamingo. A rubber duck. A laminated lake pass someone had framed with the word, "Never again," etched beneath it. The community, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. By now, my cameras picked up almost no movement near the gate. Karen had found a new way into her house, a long dirt road through the back edge of the subdivision that added 10 minutes to her drive and flooded whenever it rained. She used to strut out of her cul-de-sac like she owned the world. Now she slipped in and out like a shadow, unseen and unheard. Her white SUV, once parked proudly by the lake during her summer patrols, hadn't been near the property line in weeks. And the laminated signs, the donation buckets, the HOA clipboards, they'd all vanished like a bad dream you wake from and try not to remember. I spent more time on the lake now. Not because I needed to guard it, but because it finally felt like mine again. I built a small dock extension and added a bench. My dog started following me there every morning, wagging his tail like he'd been waiting for this calm all along. One afternoon, an older couple from the subdivision brought over a basket of muffins and a thank you card. They didn't say much, just smiled and handed it to me. Inside the card was a handwritten note. "You didn't just protect your land. You reminded the rest of us that silence only feeds the wrong people. Thank you." I kept that card on my kitchen counter. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came about a month later, when the county reached out to me for a follow-up interview. They were updating zoning maps and wanted my input on the newly clarified property lines. When the rep showed me the aerial image, the black iron gate stood out like a bold underline across the road. He smiled and said, "It's funny how one little strip of land caused so much drama." I nodded and told him the truth. It wasn't the land. It was what she thought she could get away with on it. That night, I hosted a small gathering at the ranch. Nothing flashy, just a few neighbors who'd supported me, some family, a grill, and a bonfire near the lake. We shared stories, laughed about the chaos, and watched the flames flicker in the water's reflection. Someone jokingly asked if I'd ever consider opening the lake for community use again. I just smiled and said, "Not unless they're willing to buy the whole road this time." Everyone laughed. As the night wound down and people began heading out, one of the teenagers who had unknowingly trespassed during Karen's scam stayed behind for a moment. He looked awkward, hands in his pockets, and said, "Hey, I just wanted to say sorry. I thought it was all legit. I didn't mean to cause trouble." I clapped him on the shoulder and told him not to worry. The problem was never you. It was the person who convinced you it was okay. That was the lesson Karen never learned. She thought power came from confidence and repetition. If you said something loud enough, posted enough signs, smiled the right way, people would just go along with it. And for a while she was right. But real power comes from truth, from boundaries, from standing your ground even when it's easier to stay quiet. She had the noise, but I had the facts. She had a clipboard, but I had a deed. The story of Karen became a kind of local legend. New residents got told the tale with a mix of horror and humor. Parents used it as a lesson in honesty. Kids made jokes about the haunted outhouse. Even the HOA, under new leadership, started functioning more like a support group than a neighborhood regime. People paid more attention, asked more questions, because once you've seen someone like Karen fall, you start to wonder who else was bluffing. As for me, I got my peace. The land was still. The water was clear. The gate remained locked, but the tension it once represented had dissolved into something lighter. It was no longer about keeping people out. It was about keeping the past where it belonged, on the other side of that iron fence, where Karen and her laminated lies could no longer reach. And every time I drove past that little brick outhouse with the wooden sign, I smiled. Because while she tried to sell something that didn't belong to her, I had done something better. I bought something that should have never been taken for granted. Her road home, my road to peace, same path, very different endings.